Okay, so it is 5 o'clock, so let's get started. So my name's Dave Lambert. I'm the director of Leicester's new Doctoral College, which is a replacement for the old graduate school. It kind of covers PGR through to ECR continuum, and it's kind of sort of an overarching big octopus that manages to get its tentacles into pretty much everything. And one of the best things that we get to do is to introduce these new doctoral inaugural lectures, and it's a real pleasure to be able to do this. I am from life sciences as well, so this is kind of home team for me, so it's really nice to be able to introduce the doctoral inaugural lecturers today. Just to give you a little bit of a context, we graduate in this college about 120 PhDs per year, something like that. There were 11 submissions for the doctoral inaugural lectures, and they have to be supported by very strong comments from the examining team and from the supervisor. So to get here, to get a nomination is pretty amazing stuff. And to be selected, we selected 4, so my maths is not what it used to be. It's about 3% of the total intake that we have graduating, so it's pretty amazing to get to this point. So we've got 2 really interesting, and what I can see from the abstracts, very different doctoral inaugural lectures. One looks like there's a load of props, so I'm really looking forward to hear how that's going to pan out. So the lecturers are going to talk for about 25 minutes, and then we'll have a few questions at the end. Please be gentle and be kind. And then we've got a few little presentations to do, and then at the end of the session there's some drinks and nibbles and wine downstairs, so if you'd care to join us. The programme's reversed a little bit, so we're going to have Eva is going to talk to us first, and your lecture is going to be studying human cooperation with the Centipede Game. So Eva, could you give your doctoral inaugural lecture? Thanks.
Hello everybody. It's great to see such a good turnout. First of all, can everybody hear me okay in the back? Perfect. So thank you very much for the kind introduction. My name is Eva Krockow, and I recently graduated with my PhD here from the University of Leicester. I studied human decision making, and more particularly I looked at human cooperation, and this is also what I'm going to talk about today. So the title of my talk is Studying Human Cooperation with the Centipede Game. I have to say these are my props here, so you can tell you're in for a treat. You should be looking forward to this, and I'm going to dive right in. So just a brief outline of my talk. I'm going to jump right in with an example task, so I will get you going with an example of a decision-making task which I used during my PhD. That will be followed by a bit of theory to contextualize it. Then I will present some research findings, and I will finish with some take-home messages. So if at this point you were hoping to lean back and let me do all the work, I'm afraid that's not going to happen. I actually want to create a bit of an engagement with the audience today, and I would like you to consider one of the specific decision-making tasks that I used in my PhD. I won't put this decision task into context just yet. I will only explain the rules, but I will follow it up afterwards with a bit more explanation. And you should all be paying attention, because I will actually ask for 2 volunteers from the audience to join me up here and participate in the decision-making task. There are real incentives at stake, so do pay attention. So there we go. This is the decision-making task I mentioned. It looks a bit daunting, but don't worry, I will talk you through it step by step. As you can see, there are 8 different decision points in this decision sequence, 1 to 8. It starts on the left, and it proceeds all the way to the right. So you can see decision point number 1 would be the beginning. I will try to use my pointer as well over here. And then the sequence comes to a natural end after the final decision point number 8. There are 2 decision makers in this context, person 1, the red one here, and person 2 as well, the blue one. They alternate in making decisions. So the red person 1 can make decisions at the red decision points, and the blue participant, person 2, can make choices at the blue decision points. Now, they always have two different options. They can either choose to go, which is a move that will continue the sequence and move you right to the next decision node, or they can decide to stop, in which case you would follow the vertical line down and you would end the sequence. So just to give you a bit of an example, I know this is a very theoretical, abstract task. Let's imagine there's two people collaborating in this task. Person one would have to make the first choice at decision point number 1. For the sake of this little example, let's imagine they decide to go, in which case we would follow the arrow to the right to the next decision point, number 2, where it would be for person 2 to make a choice. Again, for the sake of this example, let's imagine they choose to go as well, in which case we would move over by another step and reach decision point number 3. Now let's imagine at this point person 1 decides to stop the sequence. In this case we would follow the arrow down and reach the end of this particular decision task. So it would end at decision point 3, and I've circled the two numbers here, which are the final outcome of this particular task. They are actually called the payoffs, and in this case person 1 would have earned 6 units and person 2 would have earned 2 units. Now, what are these payoffs? So traditionally, in my field of research, we actually use money to represent the payoffs. So when people interact in these decision tasks, there is real money at stake, and they will be paid out the associated payoffs and that are displayed at the bottom of the diagram. So, for example, if the sequence stopped at point 1, they would receive £1.50 and 50p. Now, I already mentioned we'll be doing this decision task right here during this lecture. I'm afraid I'm not a millionaire. I don't have the kind of money yet as a university researcher to pay you lots of pounds. So instead I brought in my little sweets here. So in this lecture, you will be incentivized by sweets. These are peanut M&Ms, so just a disclaimer in case there are any allergies in the room, but hopefully that should still work as an incentive. So basically, when I get my two volunteers up here on the stage, each person will receive the number of sweets that are associated with the final point, so the point where the decision sequence stops. And I'm just going to outline the payoffs a bit more to you, because obviously it's lots of numbers. I try to break it down to you a bit. As you might be able to tell, they start off quite low towards the left of the sequence here, so with 1.5 and 0.5 units respectively, and then they go all the way up to 384 and 128 respectively. So quite a large increase, as you might say. And just to illustrate this a bit better, I have plotted the payoff function here for you. So you can see there's a really steep, actually exponential increase of the payoffs from the left to the right. Now, but what does that mean at an individual level? Let's have a look at how the individual moves change each person's personal payoff. So an own go move decreases the payoff by a little. So if person 1 at decision point number 1 decides to choose go, their payoff gets multiplied by 2/3. So from 1.5 units initially, it gets reduced down to 1 unit. It decreases a little bit. However, that go move of person 1 leads to a multiplication, to a massive increase actually of person 2's payoff here. So they start off with 0.5 units, that gets multiplied by 6 through the go move of the other person. So we can summarize that the own go move decreases the own payoff slightly, the other person's go move increases the payoff by quite a lot. And obviously this is then the reverse when they take turns. So if person 2 makes a go move at the second decision point, the payoff of person 1 would increase and their own payoff of person 2 would decrease slightly. And again, just looking at the payoff function here, so you can see with each go move, there is a slight decrease in the personal payoff, but it then goes up again with the other person's payoff. So it's a bit of an up and down function. And that is also the case for the other person. All right, so that's me talking for now. Does anybody have any questions about the rules of this context? I will explain to you the meaning of it just after the experiment, but I would like you to be unbiased before you participate. Does anybody have any questions on how to participate in this context? Okay, that's looking promising. Now the more important question, who is brave enough to volunteer and join me up here on the stage? I'm waiting for the hands to shoot up now, by the way. Okay, person in the back, would you like to come to the front? And I need one other volunteer, please.
We can always pick one.
I would pick. Wonderful, thank you very much. So I've prepared some very professional looking signs to indicate your moves. So I've got go on one side and stop on the other side. If you just, maybe you stop over on this side. You're going to be my person one. Okay. You're going to be my person two. If you don't mind, please do not communicate at this point. So you are allowed to consult the slides, obviously, but do not communicate with each other. That's the whole point of the of the little experiment. Okay, let's get going then. Person one, can you please make a choice at the first decision point and just hold up your sign? That is go. Okay. Person two, make your choice, please. Also go move. Wonderful. Person one again. Another go move. And person two. Another go move. Okay. Person one again, please. Ooh, she chose the stop move. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much to my volunteers. You have completed the Centipede Game. You can collect your payoffs. Okay, so this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you very much. There you go. So thank you for being brave enough to come up here and join me. I will talk through some of the motivations and possible reasons behind the choices in just a moment. But I'm sure I can guess what most people are puzzling over right now. What is a centipede game? Why the name? That is just so bizarre. And I agree. So most of you will know that a centipede is a small animal with lots of legs. Basically the name is an academic attempt at humour. So when the game was first introduced, some economists thought it looked very much like a centipede. So you can see the horizontal line being the main body, and then the vertical lines being the many legs. It's really just that simple. But for some reason the name stuck, and now whenever I talk about my PhD research, people think I study animals and I'm a biologist, which is not the case. All right, after attending to this very important question, what is the point of this game? Why would we even bother playing the Centipede Game? Now, the Centipede Game is an abstract model of human decision making. So it helps us to study human interactions in the laboratory. And using the Centipede Game, we can investigate concepts such as cooperativeness, altruism, reciprocity, and trust. So if you think back to the Centipede Game and we look back at the different moves that are possible in it, a go move can be interpreted as a cooperative action because it decreases the own payoff but increases the other person's and keeps the sequence going. So cooperation at a small personal cost. And I'd like to draw your attention particularly to that final exit point, final decision point, where they have to decide whether to continue all the way to the natural end. So basically, at decision point number 8, it's for person number 2 to make a move. So they can decide whether to choose go all the way to the natural end and receive 128 points or sweets, or whether to choose stop and receive 192. Now it's fairly obvious that 192 is the bigger number, so they should really stop there. However, people do actually sometimes go all the way to the end. So that's really an altruistic move. It's not just cooperative, it's selfless almost. So by looking at different stages in this game, it can tell us a lot about the level of cooperativeness in different people. And then finally, the stop move stands for defection. Basically, it ends the sequence and it always secures the bigger payoff to oneself. So again, an interesting move to study here. Now we can apply the centipede game to a lot of different types of human relationships. To take a very simple one, let's consider a babysitting scenario where two families, neighbouring families, take turns in looking after maybe the misbehaved children of the other family. So cooperation, which would be a go move if you link it to the centipede game, is costly because they have to invest the time and effort into looking after someone else's kids when they could be spending their Saturday evenings, I don't know, going to the cinema, enjoying themselves. So in order to keep the sequence going, to keep that interaction going, they have to make a small personal sacrifice. However, if the favour then gets returned, so if there is reciprocation in this relationship, both parties, both different families can really benefit from it in the long run. A similar example would be academic research collaborations. So, for example, two professors working on a joint project, and whenever they put some time and effort into it, they make a small personal sacrifice. But then again, if the other person reciprocates and keeps that interaction going, both individuals will benefit in the long run. So, as you can see, there are lots of different human relationships that share this underlying structure of repeated interaction, there's this repeated reciprocity. We obviously can't study all of these possible decision contexts. So if you want to find out about them, we need something else. We need something that a model to generalize from, and that's exactly where the centipede game comes in. So with the centipede game, we can study the underlying decision structures of all these relationships I've outlined, and we can simplify and generalize from it. So we can study human behaviour in the lab. Now, obviously this is a very abstract context, and there is a whole field of study dedicated just to finding out what the rationally best solution to this decision task is. That is the field of game theory. They think they have all the answers. So basically, they look at it from a very rational economic point of view and try to make recommendations as to how to behave in the game in order to get the most out of it. So I will present to you briefly this kind of theoretical underpinning here and show you what my two volunteers should have done earlier, really. So the game theoretic argument relies on backward induction reasoning, which sounds grand but is actually really simple. So backward inductioning starts by considering the decision making at the final decision point first. So in this case, decision point number 8. So I've already mentioned this briefly earlier. At decision point number 8, person 2 can decide whether to go or stop. If they decide to go, they would reach the natural end and receive £128, or sweets, or units, whatever you might want to call them. If they decide to stop, however, they would receive 192. So obviously, 192 being the bigger payoff, they would, from a rational point of view, decide to stop at this point. Now, if you take this argument back by just one decision point, you would be looking at decision point number 7 now, where it is for person number 1 to make a choice. Again, they have the choice between go and stop. Now, if they're rational, if they have all the information available in the game, they know that the other person has to stop at this point if they want to maximize their outcome. So their choice really is between choosing go, which would then be followed by a stop move and receiving 64 units, or by choosing stop immediately at point 7. And if you compare these two outcomes, 96 and 64, you can tell that 96 is the bigger number. So again, person 1 at decision point number 7 should decide to stop. And the same way, you can take it back by another node, by another decision point, looking at decision point number 6 now. So person 2 at point number 6 would again be able to predict that stop move at the following decision point. So they would know that if they were to choose go, the sequence would come to an end later. They would receive 32 points, as opposed to 48 points were they to stop at decision point 6. So I'm guessing you will all agree that it is rational to stop at decision point number 6. And this way, I'm guessing you will spot the underlying pattern now. You can take the backward induction argument all the way back to the beginning of the sequence, where it tells you that it's completely irrational to ever cooperate in the centipede game. So according to game theory, you should stop straight away and never ever choose go. Now, really, I'm sure you share my opinion. That's very counterintuitive and very surprising. We have seen it earlier, obviously, our volunteers, they went up to the 5th decision point. And indeed, many people in our centipede game experiments cooperate frequently, and hardly anybody actually stops at the very beginning. So, and I'm sure you can also think of a lot of real-life examples where people do the babysitting for their neighbours in order to get that relationship going, and where they don't defect straight away. And as we've seen, I'm sure my volunteers would agree now, if they're enjoying their M&Ms, the payoffs can really pay off to cooperate in this kind of decision-making context. Now, what did I do for my PhD research? Basically, now that I've outlined this mismatch of theory and behaviour, that's really what got me so intrigued about the centipede game in the first place. I just love how the psychological reasoning differs from the economic theory behind it. So I set out for a comprehensive 3-year study of all sorts of different decision-making contexts to do with the centipede game. I don't have time to talk about it in detail, unfortunately, so I will just focus on a small part of my PhD. But I'll just give you a quick overview. Was it all fun and games? Well, it was certainly all games, some fun, definitely a lot of hard work. So I started off with a comprehensive literature review, as you usually do. Then I conducted a qualitative study where I asked people to play the game, to engage in the task, and to talk aloud at the same time. So that it gave me a really good idea of what was going on in their minds while they were completing the task. And then this was followed up by a series of quantitative centipede game experiments, one of which I will talk to you about now. So I conducted a big cross-cultural comparison of UK and British participants to see how they differed in their decision-making in the centipede game. So I ran 2 related experiments with a combined participant pool of about 300 people, so quite a big study. And just to give you an idea of the whole experimental setup, because I guess that not all of you will be familiar with this, I had my participants come into the testing lab, which was usually a computer lab, usually about 20 people per session. So instead of just having 2 people who were standing next to each other, we had 20 people all in separate cubicles, and separated by dividing walls, so they could not communicate with one another, and they stayed anonymous the whole time. So these people received detailed instruction booklets in English and in Japanese, respectively. They were given a comprehension test after that, just to make sure they were understanding what they were doing. And then they were engaging in the centipede game. And this was done through a computer program. So they weren't holding up little cards like this. I actually had a custom-made computer program for that. So they were seeing the centipede game on their screens, and then the program would match them randomly and anonymously with another person in the room, and they had no idea who they were paired with to achieve anonymity. They would complete a centipede game and then get rematched with another person anonymously after that. And in that way, they would continue for 20 rounds. So each participant would complete 20 centipede games in total. And that was followed up by the really exciting part, the payment after the experiment. So they actually received real money. Sorry, no sweets. Most of them received a show-up fee for turning up, and then they were entered into a lottery. So one person out of the group of 20 was chosen at random, and they received their win from one of the games, and that could go up to about £300, £500. So definitely a high number, and if you think that they were all university students, that was quite a good incentive for them. So what did I do with all the data that I collected? I mean, I had about 300 participants. They played 20 Centipede games each. Quite a lot of data here. So what I did was have a look at the exit points in the Centipede games. So if you think about this, later exit points generally tell us that people have made more game moves in the game, which indicates that they were more cooperative. So if they go further, they have a later exit point towards here, you can assume that they've been more cooperative. Whereas if there were earlier exit points, that indicates fewer go moves and less cooperation. So by looking at the exit points in the Centipede game, we can make we can understand behavior or make assumptions about the levels of cooperativeness within the sample. So that's just what I did. Here are my data. I will talk you through it, don't worry. Two graphs here. The top one shows the UK data, the bottom one the Japanese data. Each diagram has got a horizontal axis here, which represents the exit points in the Centipede game. Starts at 1 here and then continues all the way up to 9, which stands for the natural end in the Centipede game. Now the vertical axes show the percentages of games that finished at each of those exit points. So the higher the bar, the more games finished at those particular exit points. So just looking at these data here, you can see two very different patterns, I'm sure you agree. So the exit points in the UK were generally a bit more spread out and skewed towards the left, so towards the earlier decision points of the Centipede game, while in Japan the data were very much skewed towards the right side of the diagram, indicating later exit moves and actually more cooperation in the Centipede game. Now, as part of my statistical analyses, I started by calculating the mean exit points. So just trying to find out where on average people were stopping in the games. And I found out in the UK, people stopped round about 4.7, so somewhere around here on average, whereas in Japan, they stopped at 6.8, so somewhere around here. So in Japan, people actually continued for almost 2 more moves than they did in the UK, which is quite a big difference, as I'm sure you will agree. And I'd like to draw your attention to 2 particular areas in the game. So decision point number 1, which I've outlined as the rational solution to the game. There were some 10% in the UK that actually did finish very early on, but nobody, not a single game in Japan, finished this early. And then looking at the final decision point, which I've outlined to you as an indicator of altruistic behaviour, again a really drastic difference here. None of the UK people went all the way to the end, while there was about a third of all the Japanese people going to the end. So, well, massive difference. So just to sum up, Japanese participants stopped at later exit points, which indicates that they chose going more frequently and they appeared to be more cooperative. So does that mean that Japanese people are simply nicer than British people? I was slightly surprised by my findings, I have to say, initially. And we obviously tried to come up with a plausible explanation for this. We had our hypotheses to start out with, and what we did do was look for possible confounding factors in here. So we actually, when we ran our experiments, we measured risk-taking attitudes of our samples, and we also measured the preferences about the distribution of money. Whereas we found some differences between the British and the Japanese participants, those attitudes were not the predicting factors for the differences in the behaviour in the Centipede game. So they could not explain these massive differences that we found. So we had another look at the literature and had a closer think about Japanese culture and the differences in society that may cause the very drastic differences in behaviour here. And we came to the conclusion that perhaps Japanese people are simply more trusting in these types of repeated reciprocal relationships. And I will explain to you why we came to that conclusion. So Japanese society is quite unique. It's characterized by a lot of very stable relationships, tight family bonds, usually in a professional context, lifetime employment with the same company. And then even across companies, they have very tight relationships. So they will work with one other company throughout their lifetime, basically. So they're very much used to this repeated reciprocal interaction pattern that is modeled by the Centipede Game. So one might say societal norms actually dictate cooperation and trust in these types of relationships. And that's exactly what we found in the Centipede Game. Now, this was only a snapshot of the research that I've conducted. This was all part of a much bigger project. And I would encourage you, if you are interested in cross-cultural differences and trust in cooperation, to read up, have a look at my 2 recent publications. Very interesting. And actually, today we've had a publication in The Conversation, which is an academic online newspaper, about 800-word articles written for a more lay audience, which can sometimes present a topic in a better way to people who are not from academia. So I would all encourage you to have a look at that. And please do comment. Okay, so I'm coming to the end of my talk now. I'm just going to finish with some take-home messages. And firstly, Centipede games can model real decision situations and can help to study human cooperation. Even if theoretically irrational, cooperative behaviour often pays off. I'm hoping my volunteers from earlier are enjoying their sweets right now. And our experiments using Centipede games have found very interesting cross-cultural differences, which we're hoping to actually study further in the future. And finally, I hope I've convinced you all to play more games, because there's sometimes a bigger meaning to them. Let me just conclude by thanking my fantastic supervisors, Bryony and Andrew. They're here in the audience. Bryony is an absolute magician with numbers and stats. And Andrew probably knows more about psychology than any other person I've ever met. So I couldn't have done it without you both. Also thank you to Mazanori, who was my supervisor in Japan. And then thanks to Karen, who's also in the audience, and Nick, who were my PhD examiners. So thanks for making the Viva, my final exam, surprisingly fun. And for passing me, of course. That was a bonus. All right, thank you very much for your attention.
Fantastically entertaining. My question is going to be, what's going to happen to the rest of the
Well, actually, my colleagues have already claimed.
Okay, we have time for a couple of quick questions. If anybody feels a burning desire to ask something, you'll be here for some drinks afterwards.
I will be here as well.
Does anybody have any burning desire for any question? Anybody? So I have only one. The Japan and England were person 1 and person 2 both from Japan?
Yes.
Okay.
So they were.
So what happens if you mix them?
That is a really good question. So some people have actually done that. There are some studies involving Japanese people playing with Americans, and obviously there's an element of in-group, out-group thinking that will complicate the whole relationship. So that then brings in a whole new set of factors, basically, that we need to consider. So we tried to stay away from that in this particular experiment, because we didn't want to bring up the out-group considerations.
Thanks very much. So